The story of Chicanos fighting for their civil rights in the United States is largely untold. As a result, little is known about the Chicano struggle for civil rights. The Chicano rights movement is a story of a people who challenged America to live up to its ideals espoused in the Declaration of Independence. More importantly, it is a story of a people fighting for a better life for themselves and their children. A story of a people who had hope and perseverance in the face of countless odds and adversity. The history of the Mexican-American struggle for civil rights may be divided into two broad political periods. The first stage, covering the century from the 1836 Texas revolt against the newly centralized Mexican government to the Depression of the 1930s, was 100 years of limited regional, local, and individual efforts to assert and defend rights guaranteed by the new Americans in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The second period, characterized by extensive development of regional and national organizations, as well as local groups, and by a clarification and amplification of those rights, cover the remainder of the 20th century. Mexicans living in the United States faced many hardships. Most important were the dangerous working conditions that migrant workers faced while working on farms. The most physically demanding jobs were regarded as menial and reserved for non-white laborers. Many migrant workers were exposed to dangerous pesticide chemicals. Oftentimes, entire families had to work and continually migrate with the growing seasons, keeping children out of school. At some farms, all the workers would have to drink from the same cup. Workers would labor under the sun all day. In the hot fields, temperatures would sometimes reach 100 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. Life expectancy for California farmers by the 1960s was only approximately 49 years. The term Chicano refers to dissatisfied Americans of Mexican descent whose ideas about the socio-economic conditions of the United States are often countercultural or radical. The term Chicano was adopted in the mid-1960s by those who experienced an awakening in pride in their Mexican ethnicity. Furthermore, the word Chicano revealed a growing sense of solidarity and the development of a common social praxis. Therefore, the widespread use of the term Chicano signaled the rebirth of pride and confidence within the Chicano people. The Chicano rights movement has been misrepresented as a single current of reactionary cultural nationalism and identity politics. However, El Movimiento, as the Chicano rights movement was known, did not follow a strategic plan, a coherent ideology, nor did it have any designated leaders. In fact, Cesar Chavez, who led the United Farm Workers, Reyes López Tijerina, founder of the movement to reclaim land grants, the Alianza Federal de las Mercedes, and Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez, leader of the Crusade for Justice, did not have the slightest premonition they would become leading symbols of the Chicano movement. Furthermore, the issues that El Movimiento focused on varied from region to region. Thus, it is difficult to assign an all-encompassing aim to El Movimiento. It can be said that the movement had many aims: the reformation of a lamentable education system for Latinos, the end of racism, economic deprivation, and police brutality. The 5 subjects of paramount importance to the Latinos were education, community, revolution, pride, and culture. This being said, a crucial part of mobilization for the movement revolved around the issue of identity and racial and cultural pride. Therefore, El Movimiento is also characterized by the socio-political civil rights struggle in the mid-1960s by and behalf of people of Mexican descent living in the United States. Furthermore, El Movimiento is identified with the ongoing effort to win civil and human rights along with the affirmation of cultural pride. Cesar Chavez was an important leader in the Chicano rights movement, but more importantly, he was the leader of the United Farm Workers Association. Chavez essentially single-handedly built a union for people who had never had one. Chavez and the United Farm Workers utilized marches, strikes, and boycotts to achieve their aims. On one march, Chavez led followers 245 miles from Delano, California, to the state capitol in Sacramento. Furthermore, Chavez utilized the hunger strike as a tactic to gain nationwide support, as he did from Robert Kennedy. Dolores Huerta was a fearless warrior in her career as an activist. Huerta's activism can be characterized as embarking on an exhausting and dangerous journey of speaking engagements and door-to-door canvassing. These tactics and activities were also those that established the United Farm Workers membership base. A topic that dominated Chicano literary discourse during the late 1960s was the call for activism and change. The scope of Chicano publications focused on the socioeconomic and political discrimination that Chicanos had experienced. Abelardo Delgado, a prominent Chicano poet, saw his role as a writer as that of a recorder for Chicano events, happenings, victories, defeats, and struggles from a poetic perspective absent from newspapers and prose journals. Delgado's poem La Causa emphasizes much of these sentiments, as do many of his works. Mexican corridos and poems were inspired by pride, struggle, and conflict with Euro-American culture. Rodolfo Gonzalez's poem Yo Soy Joaquin was written with the intention to be a catalyst for galvanizing political action for the Chicano movement. The poem fortifies the image of the community and seeks to represent an empowering vision of Chicano subjectivity. Ultimately, Gonzalez's poem sought to stand as a call to action towards a people who had emerged from a glorious history and have traveled through social pain and conflict. A profile of El Movimiento supporters are the countless migrant workers that face the harsh working conditions in the American Southwest. Latino students seeking education reform, activist church groups, both Protestant and Catholic, members of working unions, the United Farm Workers, the Community Service Organization, La Raza Unida Party, and the Crusade for Justice. It is impossible, due to the movement's nature of being disoriented, to say if El Movimiento was successful or not. Little is known about the Chicano movement outside of Chicano scholars. Therefore, in this respect, one could argue that the movement was a failure. Still, factions of the movement were successful in achieving their aims. In 1970, California grape growers signed a contract with the United Farm Workers, agreeing to grant rights to the workers. This was the first of many successful boycotts led by Chavez and Huerta. In terms of educational reform, many schools began to offer bilingual education. Regardless of the movement's failure or success, the fight for civil rights for Chicanos, Latinos, and Mexicans has not ended in the United States. Education is still a rallying cry amongst Chicanos, along with the treatment of undocumented immigrants. Still prevalent in this country is the discrimination that not only Chicanos face, but Latinos in general face. The United States still has a long way to go until it matches the ideals that it espouses of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.